I'm John McBeth. I'm a Professor Emeritus at the University of Cambridge. I was commissioned by EI, and specifically by Gunter Katlax, to research the future of the teaching profession in an international context. So I began by doing a literature search of what currently existed, and I guess one of the main sources there that was very useful was, first of all, the famous 6 OECD scenarios, which look at possible futures from business as usual, nothing changes, through to meltdown of the system because of teachers leaving the profession and so on. I looked at the French sociologist Jean-Paul Saussois, his idea of various scenarios which he looks at the individual and the social and the conservation and change scenarios. And thirdly, there was an interesting kind of model from a Scottish group that looked at first, second and third horizons and said basically it was a process model of how do you move from horizon 1, where we are at the moment, to the very ambitious horizon 3, which is a very radical, different kind of notion of what's going to be happening in the future. So you go via horizon 2 in order to get there. So a lot of the headlines are about, as I was presenting in Brussels, are about what teachers themselves talk about as the satisfiers and the dissatisfiers. What is it that really gives teachers a sense of ownership, a sense of efficacy, a sense of agency, a sense of having the power to change things, as against the dissatisfiers, which in the end make a lot of teachers actually leave the profession because it's not doing the things that give them the kind of satisfaction, which is primarily for teachers working with children, and the satisfaction they get about seeing children's achievements. I mean, most teachers find it very dreary and oppressive to keep working through sets of prescribed targets and meeting targets and doing all that calculations and paperwork, and when they really want to be in the classroom, they want to be working with children and they want to be working with parents. Some of the themes that we pick up, or I pick up in the research, is this notion of flying below the radar, that if you simply conform and you just submit to government policies and you just go along with it because it's too difficult to confront it, then nothing will change, and in fact it'll probably get worse for young people, for children and young people. And I think being part of a union, part of a collective who can take responsibility together for saying a lot of this is unacceptable, and a lot of the language that is used is language that does not reflect what we consider as a union as important in teachers' professionalism. So we've talked about taking back the language, not simply agreeing to work with government-defined language, which is all about targets and it's all about value added and it's all about very managerialist or mechanistic kind of processes. Unions can take a lead in saying, let's redefine, let's reinvent the language, let's talk about what we value rather than what we can easily measure. So the statement, we must learn to measure what we value rather than valuing what is so easily measurable. That learning for all, one of the issues, and I think David Edwards was referring to this, is we have to redefine again this notion of learning, because it has become simply equated with that word outcomes or attainment measures. And if we're genuinely talking about learning for all, we go back to talk about pedagogy. We go back to talk about the nature of what is learning for young people, what is professional learning for teachers, what is a community learning for a school or an organization, and for leadership, how would we talk about learning for leaders? And if we don't see leaders as going on learning through their lifetime, then we're not going to get the other things. But learning for governments would be a very nice thing. Learning for policymakers would be a very nice thing to see. Talking about unions, we're talking about very, very different countries around the world and how they see their unions. I was talking at a conference recently, and there was a lot of people were talking very dismissively about, oh, unions, unions, unions. And I said afterwards, why are you talking so dismissively about unions? Because you're playing into all of that anti-union rhetoric. And this person, I better not mention the country, he said, but our unions in our country are very reactionary. All they talk about is pay and so on. And there are unions in other places who are moving the agenda much towards looking at the real issues as we see in the World Summit in New York a couple of weeks ago, where unions together with ministers were talking about the real substantive issues in policy making. And I think if Education International, as an international movement, it has to bring on board those other unions that are seeing themselves with a very limited and sometimes a reactionary remit, because I think being part of this seminar in Brussels and hearing the way people are talking in the publications, the research publications that these unions are making, it's incredibly impressive. And I think unions are making an incredible contribution, but often it's just not seen or publicized, or it is also below the radar, if you like. And I think I would like to play my part in publicizing and raising the profile of the kind of hugely valuable research that unions do or unions commission. I think one of the most impressive things where we started the seminar with Guntar's looking at the range of publications that are really incredibly challenging of some of the received wisdom. And it's wonderful that these 4 or 5 books that he was referring to are all available there. And I think there's a constant theme which comes through all of those, is that the challenge, the empowerment of union members to work together to be able to understand the nature of policy making nationally and internationally, and to go deeper into ways in which we can understand that and able to confront and make a difference to the way governments think and the way governments act. But it very much depends on being able to mobilize or empower teachers themselves to see that they have a real contribution to make nationally and internationally.